This incident is from a lonely, weather-beaten farmhouse on the outskirts of Savannah, Georgia. The house is surrounded by ancient weeping willows and live oaks draped in thick, suffocating Spanish moss. I remember the exact moment the light went out of our lives. It wasn't just my brother, Caleb, dying in that hit-and-run on the dark country road back in September. It was the silence that followed. A silence that felt like it was swallowing our house whole. My sister-in-law, Elena, was a ghost of her former self. She'd sit on the porch for hours, staring out at the oak trees, her hands shaking as she clutched a photo of Caleb. My little niece, Maya, didn't understand why her daddy wasn't coming home. And me. I was 24 years old, trying to run a 1,000-acre farm with a broken heart and a mounting pile of debt. But the worst part wasn't the grief. It was my Uncle Silas. He started showing up at the house just days after the funeral. He didn't come to comfort us. He came with papers. He talked about outstanding debts Caleb supposedly owed him. He talked about how the farm was too much for a widow and a boy to handle. He had this oily, predatory grin that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "You're in over your heads, Elias," Silas had whispered to me just last week, his breath smelling like cheap whiskey and rot. "The bank is going to come for this land. Sell it to me now, and I'll make sure Elena and the kid have a roof over their heads. Otherwise, well, accidents happen in the woods." I knew what he was hinting at. I knew he had something to do with Caleb's death. But I couldn't prove it. Desperate and feeling the walls closing in, I went to see Old Man Thorne. Thorne was a hermit who lived deep in the Georgia swamps. Some called him a preacher, others called him a root doctor. My father had always told me that if the world ever turned its back on us, Thorne was the only one who could look into the dark and find a way out. I told him everything. I told him about Silas, the debt, and the feeling that something was hunting us. Thorne didn't say a word for a long time. He just sat in his rocking chair, his milky eyes staring at something I couldn't see. Finally, he spoke. "I'm going to send you someone, Elias," Thorne rasped. "His name is Chotu. He's got no family, no home in this world. He'll help you. He'll keep an eye on things." I frowned. "A kid? Old man, we need help with the harvest and protection from Silas. What's a kid going to do?" "He's not just a kid," Thorne said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "He's a shadow. He'll do the work of 10 men, and he'll be a brother to Maya. But listen to me carefully, there is a long braid of hair on the back of his head. Do not, under any circumstances, untie that braid. If you open that knot, you let the darkness back into the world. Do you understand?" I nodded, though I thought the old man was just senile. "And Silas? Be careful of your uncle," Thorne warned. "He's got a hunger in him that won't be satisfied until the ground is red." I left the swamp feeling more confused than ever. But that evening, Just as a massive thunderstorm began to brew over Savannah, there was a knock on our front door. I opened it to find a small, thin boy standing there. He couldn't have been more than 10 or 11. He was wearing tattered, dusty clothes, and his skin was a strange, pale gray color. He looked like he hadn't eaten in weeks. But it was his eyes that got me. They were pitch black. No white, no iris. Just two bottomless pits of shadow. "I'm Chotu," he said. His voice was soft, but it carried an echo, like he was speaking from the bottom of a well. "The old man sent me." "Come in, kid," I said, pulling him inside as the rain started to pour. "Come in before you drown." Elena came into the foyer, holding a candle. She stopped when she saw him. "Elias." "Who is this?" "He's the help Thorne promised," I explained. Elena looked skeptical, but she was a mother at heart. She saw how thin the boy was and immediately went to the kitchen. "Go sit in the dining room, Chotu. I'll get you some stew." Chotu didn't say thank you. He just walked into the room. His movements were off. He didn't walk so much as glide. He didn't make a sound on the hardwood floors. Not a single creak. Maya came running down the stairs, her eyes wide. A new friend. Chota looked at her, and for the first time, a small, tiny smile touched his lips. "I'm your brother now," he whispered. That first night was weird. Really weird. Elena told Chota he could sleep in the mudroom, but she told him not to worry about chores until the morning. She left a plate of stew on the table and went to bed. 10 minutes later, I walked through the kitchen to check the locks. The plate was empty. Completely licked clean. And the kitchen, it was spotless. When I had walked through earlier, there were dirty dishes in the sink, mud tracked on the floor from my boots, and the stove was covered in grease. Now, everything was gleaming. The floors were polished. The dishes were dried and put away. Even the windows had been wiped clean. I looked into the mudroom. Chota was sitting on a small wooden stool, staring at the wall. He wasn't sleeping. He was just waiting. "Did you do all this?" I asked, my voice trembling. He turned his head. He didn't turn his body, just his neck, a full 180 degrees, until he was looking at me over his shoulder. I felt a cold chill wash over me. "The old man told me to help," he said. I swallowed hard and backed out of the room. Over the next few days, Chota became part of the family. He was incredible. He could harvest a whole field in a single afternoon. He could fix the tractor in minutes. He played with Maya for hours, running through the tall grass, laughing a sound that didn't quite sound human. But the glitches started happening. One afternoon, Maya was playing with Caleb's old Polaroid camera. She was taking pictures of Chotu as he sat on the porch. "Look, Uncle Elias," she shouted, running over to me. I took the photo as it developed. My blood turned to ice. The photo showed the porch perfectly. The rocking chair was there. The peeling white paint was there. Maya was even in the corner of the frame. But Chota was gone. Where he should have been sitting, there was nothing but a faint, blurry smear of black smoke. The camera is just old, Maya, I lied, my heart hammering against my ribs. The film is bad. But I knew. Then, there was the incident with the wardrobe. Elena was cleaning the guest room when a massive, heavy oak wardrobe, a piece of furniture that weighed at least 400 pounds, lost its balance and began to tip forward. Elena was trapped beneath it. She screamed. I was in the hallway, rushing toward her, but I was too far. Chotu appeared out of nowhere. I didn't see him run into the room. He was just there. He put one small, thin hand against the falling wardrobe. The heavy oak cabinet stopped instantly. It didn't just slow down, it hit his hand and stopped dead, as if it had hit a brick wall. Chota didn't even grunt. He didn't even break a sweat. He just pushed the massive thing back against the wall with a casual flick of his wrist. Elena was sobbing, clutching her chest. Chotu, how did you? Chota didn't answer. He just looked at her with those bottomless black eyes and walked out of the room. That evening, Silas showed up again. He didn't come alone this time. He brought his son, Leo, a cruel, hulking bully who spent his days drinking and looking for trouble. They walked onto our porch like they owned the place. I heard you got some new help, Elias, Silas sneered, spatting a glob of tobacco juice onto our clean porch. Some little brat Thorn sent you. His name is Chotu, I said, stepping in front of the door. And he's family. Get off the property, Silas. Leo laughed, stepping forward. He saw Chota sitting in the corner of the porch, whittling a piece of wood. Look at this little freak, Leo mocked. He walked over and kicked the wood out of Chota's hand. What's with the hair, kid? You think you're special? Leo reached out and grabbed the long braid on the back of Chota's head. He yanked it hard. Chota didn't flinch. He didn't cry out. He just looked up at Leo. The air on the porch suddenly turned freezing. A low, vibrating hum started to echo from the floorboards. Let go, Chota whispered. Or what? Leo grinned, reaching for his pocket knife. Maybe I'll just cut this little rat tail off right now. Leo, stop it. I shouted, moving toward him. But I didn't need to. Suddenly, Leo let out a shriek of pain. He pulled his hand away as if he'd been burned. I looked at his palm. It was covered in a frostbitten, blackened welt in the exact shape of Chota's braid. He bit me. Leo screamed, clutching his hand. The little bastard bit me. He didn't touch you, Leo, I said, my voice cold. Now get out. Before things get worse. Silas glared at Chotu, his eyes narrowing with a dark, greedy realization. "You're using black magic now, Elias. You're bringing demons into this house. Fine. We'll see what the law has to say about that." They retreated to their truck and sped away, kicking up a cloud of red dust. I looked at Chotu. He was sitting perfectly still again. "Chotu," I whispered. "What are you?" He turned his head to look at me. The braid on the back of his head seemed to twitch, like a living thing. "I'm a shadow, Elias," he said. "And shadows don't leave until the light is gone." I didn't know it then, but Silas was done playing games. He was coming back that night. And he wasn't coming for the farm anymore. He was coming for blood. The house felt different after Silas left. It wasn't just the lingering smell of his cheap tobacco. It was like the air itself had grown thick, heavy, and static. Every time I walked past a room where Chota was sitting, the hair on my arms stood up. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't looking at a boy. I was looking at a hole in reality. Maya, bless her heart, didn't care. To her, Chota was the big brother she never had. She followed him everywhere, chattering away while he worked the fields with a speed that shouldn't have been possible. He never seemed to tire. He never asked for water. He just worked. But then, the scratching started. It was late Tuesday night. I was sitting in the kitchen, nursing a lukewarm coffee and staring at the ledger, trying to figure out how we were going to survive the winter without Caleb. Elena was upstairs tucking Maya in. Scritch, scritch, scritch. It was coming from the mudroom. I stood up, my heart doing a slow, heavy thud in my chest. I walked to the doorway and peered in. Chota was sitting on his stool, his back to me. His head was tilted at a sharp, unnatural angle, and his hand was buried in the hair at the base of his neck. He was scratching at the braid, the one Thorn told us never to touch. He was doing it with such intensity that I could hear his fingernails rasping against his scalp. "Chotu," I whispered. He stopped. He didn't turn around. "It's tight, Elias," he said. His voice sounded different, thicker, like it was bubbling up through mud. "It hurts. The knot, it wants to come undone." I remembered Thorn's face. The warning. If you open that knot, you let the darkness back into the world. "Don't touch it, kid," I said, my voice shaking. "Just try to sleep. I'll call Thorn in the morning." He didn't answer. He just went back to staring at the wall. The next morning, things went from weird to terrifying. I was out in the barn when I heard Elena scream from the house. I dropped my shovel and ran, my heart hammering against my ribs. I burst through the back door, expecting to see Silas or one of his thugs. Instead, I found Elena in the kitchen, her hands over her mouth, staring at Chotu. The boy was standing by the stove. He had been trying to help with breakfast, but something had gone wrong. A massive, Heavy cast-iron skillet had fallen from the hook above the stove. It hadn't just fallen, it had landed directly on Chotu's shoulder. The edge of the skillet had sliced deep. I could see the tear in his shirt. I could see the wound. But there was no blood. Not a single drop. Inside the gash, there was only a dry, gray substance that looked like old ash. Chotu didn't even flinch. He just picked up the skillet and put it back on the stove. "Elena, get Maya out of here," I commanded, my voice barely a whisper. "Elias, look at him," she breathed, her eyes wide with horror. "He's hurt, but he's not bleeding." Chotu looked at us. His black eyes seemed to swallow the light in the room. "I'm fine," he said. But then, he reached up and clawed at the braid again. "It's too tight. Please. Elena. Mom, make it stop." Elena's maternal instinct was her greatest strength, but in that moment, it became our greatest weakness. She couldn't stand to see a child in pain. She didn't see a shadow or a spirit, she saw a boy who was suffering. "Elena, don't," I shouted. She ignored me. She rushed forward and grabbed Chotu by the shoulders. She turned him around. The braid was red, inflamed, and pulsing like a heartbeat. "It's okay, honey," she whispered, her fingers reaching for the knot. "I'll fix it. I'll make it better." "Elena," Thorn said, snap. The sound was like a dry branch breaking in the woods. The moment her fingers unraveled the coarse black thread, the kitchen lights exploded. Shards of glass rained down on us. A sound tore through the house, not a scream, but a roar of wind that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The temperature dropped 40 degrees in a second. I could see my breath in the air. Chotu didn't move. He just went limp. He collapsed onto the kitchen floor like a puppet whose strings had been cut. "Chotu!" Elena cried, dropping to her knees beside him. The house went dead silent. The wind vanished. The only sound was the heavy, rhythmic thud of my own heart. What did I do? Elena sobbed, shaking him. "Chotu, wake up. Please." He wouldn't wake up. His skin, already pale, had turned a sickly, translucent blue. His eyes were closed, and his body was ice cold. I didn't know what else to do. I couldn't call Thorn, the phone lines were down from the wind. I called the only person I could think of. Dr. Miller. He was the local country doctor, a man who had seen everything from tractor accidents to moonshine poisoning. He arrived an hour later, his face grim as he stepped over the shattered glass in the kitchen. We had moved Chotu to the sofa in the living room. Maya was upstairs, crying, while Elena sat by Chotu's head, clutching her rosary. Dr. Miller sat down, opened his bag, and pulled out his stethoscope. He placed the cold metal against Chotu's chest. He stayed like that for a long time. His brow furrowed. He moved the stethoscope. Then he moved it again. He pressed 2 fingers against Chota's neck, searching for a pulse. Then his wrist. He looked up at me, and I saw a look in his eyes I had never seen in a medical professional. It was pure, unadulterated fear. "Elias," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Where did this boy come from?" He's a ward of Oldman Thorne," I said. "What's wrong with him?" Dr. Miller stood up, backing away from the sofa. "He didn't even pack his bag." "This isn't possible," Miller said. "There is no heartbeat. There is no breath. There is no blood pressure. Elias, according to every medical metric I have, this boy has been dead for at least 10 years." Elena let out a strangled cry. "He was just working the fields," I argued, desperation clawing at my throat. "He was playing with Maya an hour ago. He can't be dead." "I don't know what to tell you," Miller said, reaching for the door. "He's cold. He's stiff. He's a corpse. I can't be here. I'm calling the sheriff." He practically ran out the door. I stood there, looking at the corpse on my sofa. The braid Elena had untied was lying loose across his shoulder, the black thread discarded on the floor. Suddenly, Chota's hand twitched. His eyes didn't open, but his mouth did. A thick, black liquid began to seep from the corners of his lips. "They're coming," he whispered. The voice didn't come from his throat. It came from the air around him. "Silas, he's at the gate. He wants the red ground." I ran to the window. Down the long, dirt driveway, I saw the headlights. 2 trucks. I recognized Silas's Ford, and behind it, a beat-up Chevy belonging to some of the local meth cookers he ran with. They weren't coming to talk. I could see the glint of shotguns in the moonlight. "Elena, take Maya to the cellar," I yelled. "Now. Lock the door and don't come out until I say so." "What about Chotu?" she cried. "He's not a boy, Elena. Just go." I grabbed Caleb's old 12-gauge from the mantel. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the shells. I stepped out onto the porch just as the truck screeched to a halt in the yard. Silas stepped out, a double barrel tucked under his arm. Leah was beside him, his hand still bandaged from the burn Chota had given him. 3 other men, looking ragged and dangerous, climbed out of the second truck. "Evening, Elias," Silas called out, his voice oily and triumphant. "I heard you had some trouble. Heard the doctor came by. Heard you got a dead body in the house. Get off my land, Silas." I roared, leveling the shotgun. "I'll blow you to hell." "You won't do nothing," Leo laughed, spitting on the ground. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. We're taking this farm tonight, Elias. One way or another. Maybe Elena and the kid live, maybe they don't. Depends on how fast you sign the papers." One of the thugs stepped forward, raising a Molotov cocktail. He lit the rag. "Let's see if the old wood burns." He threw it. The bottle sailed through the air, a flaming arc of gasoline. It was headed straight for the porch. I closed my eyes, waiting for the explosion. It never came. I opened my eyes and saw the bottle suspended in midair. It was hovering 3 feet in front of the porch stairs, caught in a swirling vortex of black smoke. The fire didn't go out. It turned blue. A shadow stepped out of the front door behind me. It was Chotu. But he wasn't a boy anymore. His body was stretched, his limbs impossibly long and thin, like pieces of charred wood. His face was a featureless mask of gray ash, save for the 2 pits of darkness where his eyes should be. The braid Elena had untied was now a writhing mass of black smoke, coiling around his head like a crown of serpents. The thugs backed away, their faces twisted in terror. "What the hell is that?" Silas screamed, his bravado vanishing in an instant. "Leo, shoot it. Shoot it now." Leo raised his rifle and fired. The bullet hit Chota square in the chest. There was no impact. No blood. The bullet simply vanished into the black smoke. Chota moved. He didn't run. He flickered. 1 second he was on the porch, the next he was standing directly in front of Leo. He reached out a long, skeletal hand and grabbed Leo by the throat. Leo didn't even have time to scream. Chota lifted the 200-pound man off the ground with one hand. I watched in horror as the shadows from the trees seemed to crawl toward them, wrapping around Leo's legs like living vines. "You wanted the ground," the shadow voice hissed, vibrating in my very teeth. "Now the ground wants you." Chota slammed Leo down. He didn't just hit the dirt, he went into it. The earth seemed to liquefy, swallowing Leo's legs, then his waist, then his chest. "Silas! Help me!" Leo shrieked, clawing at the mud. Silas was already running for the truck, his tough guys scattering into the woods like rats. But the shadows were faster. The weeping willow trees began to lash out, their branches moving like whips. One of the thugs was snatched off his feet and dragged into the dark canopy. A second man was tripped by a rising root and pulled face first into the dirt. Silas reached his truck, but the doors wouldn't open. The metal was covered in a thick layer of black frost. He turned around, his back against the truck, as Chotu, the horrific, stretched version of the boy, glided toward him. "No, please. I'll leave. I'll never come back." Silas begged, his voice high and shrill. Chotu stopped. He tilted his featureless head. "You killed the brother," Chota whispered. "Now the brother's shadow is here to collect." Suddenly, the front door of the house flew open. Elena ran out, ignoring my shouts. She saw the monster. She saw Silas cowering. "Chotu, stop," she screamed. The shadow froze. It turned toward her. "He's a monster, Chotu. But don't do this. Don't become like him." The black smoke around Chotu's head flared. He looked at Silas, then back at Elena. For a second, the featureless mask flickered, and I saw the face of the small boy again, scared, lonely, and burdened by a darkness he never asked for. "He killed Caleb," Chota said. The voice was small now. "Human." "We know," Elena sobbed. "And he'll pay. But not like this. Please. Come back to us." The shadow began to shrink. The limbs shortened. The grayish turned back into pale skin. Within seconds, Chota was a boy again, standing in the middle of the yard, surrounded by the half-buried, unconscious bodies of Silas and his men. But there was a problem. The braid was still untied. Chota fell to his knees, clutching his head. "It's too much, the darkness. I can't keep it in." He let out a blood-curdling shriek as the black smoke began to pour out of his eyes and mouth, thick and suffocating. It wasn't just defending us anymore, it was consuming everything. The grass was turning black. The trees were shriveling. "Elias!" Elena shouted over the roar of the shadow wind. Thorn said the braid. "We have to tie it back. We have to bind the darkness." I looked at Chotu. He was disappearing into the smoke. I knew what I had to do. I had to get to him before the shadow swallowed him whole, or none of us were making it out of this night alive. The world was disappearing. The black smoke pouring out of Chota wasn't just smoke anymore. It was a physical weight, a cold, oily tide that swallowed the moonlight and turned the air into ice. I couldn't see the trucks. I couldn't see the trees. I couldn't even see my own hands in front of my face. The only thing I could hear was the sound of Silas and his men screaming, but their voices sounded miles away, muffled by the thick, unnatural fog. And then, there was the sound coming from Chotu. It was a low, vibrating hum that made my teeth ache and my vision blur. "Elias. Where are you?" I heard Elena's voice, sharp with panic. I felt her hand grab my jacket. She was right beside me, but in this darkness, she was just a shadow. "I'm here," I yelled, my voice sounding thin and weak against the roar of the shadow wind. "We have to get to him. If that smoke reaches the house, it's over." "I have the thread," Elena cried. She held up a small, glowing piece of crimson string. It was the blessed thread Thorn had given her months ago, something she'd kept tucked inside her Bible for emergencies. In the pitch-black void, that thread was glowing with a faint, pulsing light. "We have to tie the braid, Elias. We have to bind the knot." But getting to Chota was like trying to walk through a hurricane made of needles. Every step I took felt like I was pushing through deep, freezing water. The darkness didn't just block my sight, it attacked my mind. I started seeing things, Caleb's face, pale and bloodied from the accident, my father's disappointed eyes, every mistake I'd ever made. The shadow was feeding on our grief, our guilt. "Don't listen to it," Elena screamed, her voice cutting through the mental noise. She was stronger than me. Her love for Maya, her need to protect her home, it was like a shield. She pulled me forward, dragging me toward the center of the yard where the black vortex was spinning. We found him in the middle of a crater. The ground around Chota had disintegrated. He was hovering a few inches off the dirt, his small body twitching violently. The black smoke was erupting from his eyes, his ears, and the base of his neck where the braid had been unraveled. His jaw was unhinged, dropping down to his chest, and his skin was turning to gray, cracking ash. He didn't look like a boy anymore. He looked like an ancient, decaying corpse that had been reanimated by a nightmare. "Chotu!" Elena screamed, throwing herself toward the crater. A massive lash of black smoke whipped out, striking her in the chest and throwing her backward. She hit the dirt hard, the red thread falling from her hand. "No!" I roared. I lunged for the thread, but the shadows on the ground, the long, grasping fingers of the weeping willows, wrapped around my ankles, yanking me off my feet. I looked up and saw Silas. He was only 20 feet away, but he was half buried in the mud. The ground had swallowed him up to his waist, and the shadows were slowly crawling up his chest, their smoky fingers digging into his skin. He was staring at Chotu, his eyes wide with a madness I'll never forget. "Kill it!" Silas shrieked, his voice bubbling with blood. "Elias, kill the monster. It's eating me. It's eating everything." I ignored him. I crawled through the mud, my fingers scratching the dirt until I found the red thread. It was warm to the touch, almost hot. I looked at Chotu. The shadow boy's eyes snapped toward me. Two pits of infinite, freezing void. "You let me out," the shadow voice boomed. It wasn't Chota's voice anymore. It was something older. Something that had been trapped in the dark for a long, long time. I tried to stand, but the gravity inside the circle was too strong. I was being pulled toward the center, toward the void. I could feel the heat being sucked out of my body. My heartbeat was slowing down. Then, I saw Elena move. She didn't try to fight the wind. She didn't try to resist the pull. She crawled on her hands and knees, her face set in a mask of absolute determination. She reached the edge of the crater and reached out her hand. "Chotu," she whispered. The wind didn't stop, but it hesitated. "Chotu, honey, it's Mom," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I know you're hurting. I know you're tired. But you don't have to carry this anymore. You protected us. You saved Maya. You did your job." The horrific, unhinged jaw of the shadow boy twitched. The black smoke pouring from his mouth began to thin. "Go away," Chota rasped. A single, gray tear of ash ran down his face. I'm dark. Elena. I'm the shadow. You're my son, Elena said, her fingers finally brushing against his ice-cold hand. The moment she touched him, the black vortex exploded in a final, desperate burst of energy. I was thrown backward, my head hitting a tree trunk. Everything went blurry. I could hear Silas's final, gurgling scream as the earth finally closed over his head, leaving nothing but a patch of churned, black mud. Through the haze, I saw Elena pull herself up. She climbed into the crater, ignoring the black smoke that was burning her skin like acid. She grabbed the loose, fraying braid on the back of Chotu's head. Elias. Now, she screamed. I forced myself up. I didn't think about the pain. I didn't think about the fear. I lunged forward, throwing the red thread to Elena. She caught it. With a strength that seemed fueled by Caleb's memory, she grabbed the thick, unruly mass of Chotu's hair. She twisted it, coiling it tightly back into the braid it had been before. The black smoke shrieked, snapping at her fingers, biting into her flesh. I could smell her skin scorching. She didn't let go. She wrapped the red thread around the base of the braid once, twice, 3 times. With this knot, I bind you, she cried out, her voice echoing Thorn's ancient cadence. With this thread, I release you. Go back to the light, Chotu. Go back home. She pulled the knot tight. Crack. It sounded like a lightning strike hitting the house. A blinding flash of white light erupted from the center of the crater. It was so bright it felt like it was burning my retinas. I covered my eyes, screaming as the heat washed over me. And then, silence. Absolute, deafening silence. The wind was gone. The smoke was gone. The freezing weight on my chest had vanished. I opened my eyes. The yard was a disaster zone. The trees were blackened skeletons. The trucks were overturned and covered in a thick layer of gray frost. Silas and his men were nowhere to be seen, just 4 or 5 disturbed patches of earth where the ground had swallowed them whole. In the center of the yard, Elena was sitting in the dirt. She was cradling Chotu in her arms. The boy was small again. The gray ash had faded back into pale, human skin. His eyes were closed, and his face was peaceful, as if he were just having a long overdue nap. The braid was tied perfectly on the back of his head with the red thread. I stumbled over to them, my legs shaking. Is he okay? Elena looked up at me. There were tears streaming down her face, and her hands were covered in raw, black burns from the shadow smoke. He's gone, Elias, she whispered. I looked down at the boy. He wasn't breathing. But he wasn't a corpse anymore, either. He looked light, almost transparent. The old man said he was a shadow, Elena said, stroking Chotu's hair. He said he was sent to help us. He did. He took the darkness of this place, and he took it with him. As we watched, Chota's body began to shimmer. It started at his feet and moved up to his head. He was turning into a pale, golden light. He wasn't rotting, he was dissolving. He opened his eyes one last time. They weren't black anymore. They were a soft, clear hazel, the color of the morning sun on the Georgia oaks. "Thank you, Mom," he whispered. And then, he was gone. A final, soft breeze swept across the yard, carrying away the last of the golden light. The heavy, suffocating pressure that had haunted our farm since Caleb's death was completely gone. The air felt clean. It felt new. The next morning, Old Man Thorne arrived at the house. He didn't say a word. He just walked to the center of the yard, to the spot where the crater had been. The earth had already begun to heal. Fresh green grass was already sprouting where Silas had been swallowed. Thorne looked at Elena and me. He saw the burns on her hands. He saw the exhaustion in my eyes. He was a soul caught between worlds, Thorne said, his voice low and gravelly. Bound by a grudge he didn't start. You gave him the one thing a shadow can't find on its own. What's that? I asked. A home, Thorne said. And a mother's mercy. We never reported Silas or his men missing. In a place like the Georgia backwoods, people vanish all the time. The police found the abandoned trucks, but there was no sign of a struggle, no blood, and no bodies. Just a lot of weird electromagnetic interference that the sheriff couldn't explain. Uncle Silas's debts mysteriously disappeared with him. The farm was ours. Maya still talks about her big brother sometimes. She tells us that she sees him in the corner of her eye when she's playing under the willow trees, just a flickering shadow that keeps her safe when she wanders too close to the creek. I don't laugh at her. I don't tell her it's her imagination. Because I know that somewhere out there, the light is a little brighter because one small shadow finally found his way back. But sometimes, when the wind blows from the swamp and the moon is thin, I still find myself checking the locks. I still find myself looking at the back of Maya's head, making sure her hair is loose. Because I know how easy it is for a knot to come undone. And I know that some shadows, they never really leave. They just wait for the light to fade. Check your